Hey guys, it's Amber from Notable Ink, and I'm back with cut cardstock and some eye-catching Zentangle cards. These are so easy to make, and what makes them really pop off the page is the shading that we're going to add to create 3D dimension on one layer cards. I have a piece of Pop Tone Razzleberry cardstock that I've used Altenew fine frame square die to cut a square out of the center. I'll use this as a template to draw a square on my Savoy 100% cotton cardstock. I have a Micron 01 pen and a Sakura Graphic 1 pen. I'm going to start off with Crescent Moon. This is a very simple beginner's Zentangle pattern. I've done this before. I'm going to use it a little bit differently and stack them up. So you basically start with these little half moons, and I'm just doing that fairly evenly patterned around the square. I'm going to fill that in with the Graphic 1 pen. So Zentangle should be relaxing. You should be able to kind of meditate with it and lose yourself in the patterns. To me, filling in those crescent moons with a Micron 01, there's nothing zen about that for me. So I use the Graphic 1 pen, which is a larger nib, but still comes to a fine point, so you have quite a bit of control over it. The next step is to aura those crescent moons. So I usually do anywhere between 2 to 4 outlines around those crescent moons, depending on the look that I'm going for. If you use the same amount of space in between each one of those auras or outlines, it looks a little more consistent and cohesive, but it's totally okay if they're not even. So here I have the fine frame that I had cut out, and again, I was just using that other piece as a template. What I was really going for with my die cut was this small fine frame because I wanted to add a pop of color around this Zentangle pattern that I was going to do. So I'm just checking it to make sure I didn't go too far outside of my lines, and I decided to stack these up and add a few more. So here you can see I went ahead and did the auras first, and then I'll go back and fill them in. And for the second layer, I just did 2 auras rather than 3, just to switch things up a little bit. So you can see how fast that Graphic 1 will fill in that space. I've stamped a hello sentiment with the Altenew Rosie Posy stamp set. And this paper is amazing, you guys. This is the closest paper that I've found to the original Fabriano Zentangle paper that you see on the tiles. Now when you add your graphite, this is just a normal graphite pencil. You don't want to add any graphite over the black areas. When you hold your tortillon or paper stump, you want to hold it pretty parallel to the paper. You don't want it up on its tip. And then you just use the tip of the tortillon to tease out that graphite into the paper. This is 100% cotton paper, so like I said, it's very similar to the Fabriano tiles. The paper has texture and some give to it, and you can see that texture here in the close-up. And there you can see the difference between the shading and what a difference that makes in the pattern and the overall feel of the project. It really makes it look three-dimensional. So here I'm going to add some temporary adhesive to the back of the square. So this was the positive piece that came out of the die cut that I did earlier. I'll just use a fine tip applicator to apply some art glitter glue, and I'm going to use that temporarily adhered square to make sure that I get my fine frame adhered square and even. I don't want it, because it's so fine, it's easy to get askew. And so I'm just using that as a template to fit it around there. That way everything is nice and square. And here's the final card. So before I took some photos, I took some test photos and I needed far more shading. So you can see that I went back in and added a lot more graphite and deepened up the shading. Totally up to you in the look that you're going for. You can keep it the light shading or not. Here I have the liquid marble stencil from Altenew. So I'm just going to tape another piece of the Savoy paper down to my glass mat. I'll tape the stencil over that, and I'm going to use this template again as a mask. I'm using Altenew Orange Cream Crisp Dye ink and one of the new Altenew blending brushes to blend this ink onto the stencil. So what I want to do is be able to Zentangle in the white space that's left by the stencil and then not on the orange. This orange ink is one of my favorites because it's a cool orange. It's such a pretty color, and I really enjoyed ink blending on the Savoy paper. It's a totally different experience than ink blending on Nina Classic Crust Solar White, which is a really smooth cardstock. It has almost an airbrushed appearance. It's so cool. So all of the products will be listed down below, guys, and then be sure to share and subscribe if you're enjoying this video. So for this card, I'm going to use one of my favorite patterns, which is pokeroot. I love the organic patterns. They're my favorite of all the different types of patterns in Zentangle. I haven't Zentangled in so long, you guys. I'm really out of practice. It's almost difficult for me now to even call myself a certified Zentangle teacher because I am so out of practice and I've forgotten so many of the patterns. But I was inspired to do it because Colleen at Irish Rose Creations recently took my Zentangle class that's on Altenew Academy. She sent me a few of her photos and I was just so inspired by her projects. I thought, we need to do that again. So now I'm going to do a little watercolor. Because this is 100% cotton paper, it takes to watercolor really quite well and absorbs the pigments nicely. So I'm using a wet on wet technique. I'm not using a ton of water because it's not necessarily a watercolor paper, but like I said, it performs really quite well. And I didn't find that there was any warping to the paper with the amount of water that I was using. So I'm dropping in a little bit of clean clear water and then I'm dropping in the pigment. These are the Altenew Artist Watercolor 24 pan set, and the colors I'm using are Cherry Blossom and Red Sunset. I had those colors mixed up from a previous project that I had done. So here you can see how that's looking. Now the bottom right, I started with a wet on wet technique. Then kind of at the top right, I started to use a wet on dry technique. Both of them worked equally well and looked pretty much the same. Here I'm going to fill in the stems of the pokeroot with a Micron 01 pen. I wanted to have some contrast in there. Alternately, if you didn't want to fill in the stems, you could have filled in the white space and left the stems white. And here's how we're going to add additional dimension. So when I was painting the pokeroot, I painted the part of the pokeroot or the little berry that was underneath the stencil edges darker than the rest of the berry. I'm going to go in with the graphite and deepen up that shadow. It creates a casted shadow appearance to raise up the stencil area and recess the pokeroot. I'm stamping on a sentiment from Altenew Flower Vine stamp set, and this time I won't put a frame around this. I love the organic edges of the patterns and how they just truncate and end. I hope you guys enjoyed these simple but eye-catching projects today, and if you're a card maker and have never tried Zentangle, I hope you give it a try. If you're a tangler and have never tried putting it on cards, it's such a great way to send out the art that you create rather than having your tiles kind of collecting around the house. So I hope that you feel inspired to give it a whirl. Thanks so much for joining me today. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing, liking, and ringing that bell so you don't miss any new inspiration. Here's a couple more videos for you before you leave, and I'll see you real soon.